If you already didn't know, Sunday's game confirmed that Bijan Robinson is one of the best football players on the planet.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for so many years, almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And to become an everydayer, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is the Week 7 All-22 review, where I've broken down the film from the Falcons' loss to the Seattle Seahawks. We'll revisit the team's secondary issues that were primary in the Seahawks game, if you pardon the pun. And we'll talk about Kirk Cousins' lack of mobility being a bigger problem in this game than it has been to date. But we'll start this thing off positively, right? And the way that we're going to start is Bijan Robinson is incredible, or as a certain first overall Atlanta Hawks rookie might say, incroyable. Okay, I didn't take French in high school. I took Spanish, so pardon my pronunciation there. Pardon my French, literally. But Bijan has been incredible all season long, and now we really get an opportunity to really break it down here on this illustrious All-22 podcast. Been sort of saving this. I'm not a fan of the fantasy-based narratives. We live in reality here on this illustrious podcast, and he's been the team's MVP through 7 games. This has been on display every Sunday. This was especially on display this past Sunday against Seattle, where he was routinely turning negative plays into positive ones. I'm not talking about, he just got like an extra 2 or 3 yards here, there. Like, there were several plays where he was getting 7, 8, 9 or more yards than what he should have been getting on those plays. You saw him take a simple 26-yard check down, or take a simple check down and turn it into a 26-yard gain, where he nearly scored on a particular play. And he's done that a handful of times throughout this season. And that was especially on display against the Seahawks team. And I feel like he could probably do more of that stuff, than he currently is doing, but he's spending so much time staying into pass protect on a lot of these passing downs rather than being this dynamic weapon in the passing game. And he continues to be great in pass protection. He continues to showcase that ability almost every single week. There was 2 or 3 like highlight reel blitz pickups, and there was again the case this past Sunday where he stepped up, and stonewall some blitzer or whatnot. And I was shocked to look it up that Bijan is 25th out of 37 running backs according to PFF in pass blocking grade. And even though he's like 11th in their pass blocking efficiency metric, and their grading system is supposed to be this qualitative sort of metric, so I don't quite understand why his grade is so low, unless they're like unfairly dinging him for that Vita Vea play, which I think they are. But from a couple of weeks ago. And so I need one of you everydayers, one of you that lives in the Cincinnati area, right? That's the home office of PFF, right? I need you to go out there and picket that office, okay? Or tie yourself to a telephone pole, go on a hunger strike or something until they change Bijan's grade to the correct grade. Because, I don't know what that website is doing, right? I think we're going to have someone on PFF later on the pod later this month. So I'll have to sort of take it directly to the source at that point in time. But, we're not going to go down that road after the Nate Landman debacle. But, the analytics are not doing great. Like, the next gen stats, I think, had Bijan's rushing yards over expected at 27 in this game. And I saw like just 3 runs in the second and third quarter that, in my opinion, watching the film, like he got like 23 yards that wasn't blocked for him. And this is why you can't trust the GPS data, as I discussed on the previous episode a couple of weeks ago. It's only really good for figuring out position, all these, analytics that they have coming out of it. And like, I'm not anti-analytics. I'm anti-bad analytics, right? There's a lot of bad data out there that's floating around that people think is good data, and some of this stuff that we're talking about is some of that bad data. But I say all this, right, because I do think when we watch the film as a film snob, smelling my own stuff like it don't stink, I feel like we're on the verge of Bijan being, that Christian McCaffrey level of running back. Right. He's not going to get the recognition because the production isn't there, especially the fantasy production. Right. He needs to be RB1 or RB2 in fantasy in order to be that. And I think right now he's like RB6 or something like that. But I feel like in that regard, that's not a Bijan Robinson issue. That's a Falcons offense issue. I feel like they're leaving so much meat on the bone when it comes to production, especially in the passing game. Right. Like I feel like anytime the Falcons are in a 3rd and 12 or longer, like just run a screen or want to swing past the Bijan and see what he can do. Because I feel like there's like a 60% chance that he's going to convert a 3rd and 20. That's how good he is with the ball in space. Right. And again, that's why I feel like there's a lot of meat left on the bone when it comes to him specifically as a pass catcher. He's I think he's currently on pace for 68 targets this year. That's about 20 less. I think 18 exactly less than he had last year. That's about 25 less than what Christian McCaffrey has routinely averaged over a 17-game sample during his years in San Francisco. That's about 50 less than what McCaffrey has averaged over the course of his career. And so I feel like, you do the math. It's like, if we can just get Bijan 2, maybe 3 more targets a game, we're on that level. And I feel like the opportunity is there. And that's not meant to knock Zach Robinson by any means, but I do feel like we're, there's 25 to 40% more productive Bijan could potentially be out there, specifically as a pass catcher. Again, as a running back, he's doing incredible stuff as a runner and whatnot. But again, part of that is due to his value as a pass protection, in pass protection, I'm sorry. Right, where with the Falcons playing 11 personnel 97, 98% of the time, he's staying in as part of those 6-man protections to protect when teams blitz. But I kind of wish the Falcons would run a little bit more 21 personnel so you could keep Algier in as that 6-man protection, and that would allow Bijan to release as one of the receivers instead. You know what? And Algier does have a top 10 pass blocking grade according to PFF, so clearly he's an upgrade in that regard based off of that. But I feel like that would allow Bijan to be more of a weapon in the passing game. And so, as a film snob who gets the brunt of his enjoyment watching this godforsaken football team, also known as the Atlanta Falcons, my enjoyment comes from watching good football players play good football, right? And I would greatly appreciate it as someone who is a film snob that appreciates good football play. And again, I'm not trying to suggest that, hey, we just dial up 5% more 21 personnel is going to suddenly turn this offense into a juggernaut. I'm just saying, for my entertainment value, and I'm sure plenty of yours, let's get Bijan the ball a little bit more in the passing game. That's all I'm saying. So, I know there's a couple of you weirdos out there that have been and will continue to complain about the Bijan Robinson pick and the whole positional value nonsense that I sit here and I go man, you're absolutely right, man. It was a terrible decision for the Falcons to select Bijan, and I hope we get punished for the next decade, having to be forced to have to watch him play football for the next decade. What a horrible punishment, man. It's cruel and unusual punishment. And I'm of course being sarcastic because I'm just simply saying what are you guys doing? Stop complaining. Me, I'm a complainer. The reason why I host the Locked On Falcons podcast is because I'm so good at complaining about the Atlanta Falcons. That's my origin story, is complaining about this football team. I'm good at complaining. So if I'm sitting here telling you need to stop whining, stop complaining about stuff, you need to go check yourself. So that's basically what I want to get across for all of you, knuckleheads out there that are still complaining about the Bijan pick. So, this game, the Falcons were only competitive on offense because of Bijan. The 2 touchdown drives were basically Bijan drives, and Kirk Cousins was basically out there doing checkdowns and whatnot. And that gets us to what I want to talk about next on today's All-22 review, which is Kirk Cousins' performances and why this game was really, to me, the first time that all the mobility concerns surrounding Kirk really came to a head. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Basketball season is peaking right around the corner, and it is time to get back in the arena with Game Time. And Game Time has a great new feature called Game Time Picks, which is going to make getting tickets to see your favorite teams like the Atlanta Hawks play even easier. Game Time Picks is going to filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through hundreds, if not thousands, of tickets. All you got to do when you go to the Game Time app is check that out. You can also hit great features in the app like toggling all-in prices, so you don't have to worry about hidden fees at checkout. You get the panoramic seat view, so what you see is what you get. And so whether it's basketball, football, baseball, other sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is in your Game Time is taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. And Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 10 million active members because it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike on other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. You just pick more or less on up to 6-player stat projections and just watch the winnings roll in. And if you're looking to get in on this action because certain sports books aren't available in your state, don't worry, Prize Picks probably is. And especially in the state of Georgia, I know that's true. And withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And you can get your money in as quickly as 15 minutes. So, this week you got the Falcons versus the Bucks. You want to put money on this incredible football player named Bijan Robinson. You want to go out there and check out, the projections for some of the Bucks running backs and receivers in the passing game, just because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin won't be there, or some of the Bucks backup wide receivers. It's all there for you on the Prize Picks app. Just download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL and you'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. Prize Picks, run your game. So as I mentioned, I think this was the first game where I felt like Kirk's mobility really hurt the Falcons, or lack thereof when it comes to Kirk's mobility. Now, it has been an issue at times this season, but to me, outside of a handful of plays, I don't think it has been as detrimental to the offense as maybe some people would lead you to believe. And again, you're saying, what about week 1? We don't talk about week 1, guys. I thought we explained this on the podcast. We flushed that game away. It does not factor into any commentary we have on this podcast anymore. We just don't talk about it. Okay. But basically what I'm saying is it's been an issue, but it hasn't been maybe as big an issue as I think other people. And it's similar to my stance on play calling, right? Where I feel like people sort of get bent out of shade over 2 questionable play calls or whatever in a game. And I've always sort of likened it to the idea of in a football game where you have over 60 plays, right? Where you call, it'd be similar to if you took a test or a quiz or an exam that had over 60 questions and you missed 2 or 3 of them, you'd still get an A on that test, right? And so I tend to think that a couple of plays here or there tend to get blown out of proportion in the larger picture of things. But I know some of the Locked On Falcons insiders are being like, Aaron, you're saying all this about blowing a couple of plays out of proportion when you've been sitting here slandering Darnell Mooney on the extended All-22 reviews over the last couple of weeks. And I sit here and I say, shut up, mind your business. You're taking that completely out of context. But in all seriousness, I felt like this was a game where multiple instances where Kirk's ability or inability to move within the pocket led to negative plays, including sacks, including him missing throws. There was a couple of times where he was off the mark on some throws. He couldn't necessarily move his feet, step into throws. He couldn't necessarily realign his footwork to throw outside the numbers, wasn't putting enough on the ball. There was a couple of times where he was trying to throw off his back foot, that right leg that had the Achilles tear, and you could clearly tell that he could not necessarily do that in this game. And so I say all that not to be a referendum on Kirk Cousins, right? So, I know some of you Penix pumpers, as we call you, are going to clip what I just said and use that as ammunition for your, let's bench Kirk to play Penix agendas. And I had, one Locked On Falcons insider on Sunday basically asked me, are we at level 5 with the Kirk Cousins chaos meter, which is level 5? Is it, is Kirk's chaos gotten to a point where it's time to play Penix and we're not there? And I sit here and I go, you guys are so thirsty. All right, I've never seen a group of grown men simp this hard for a rookie quarterback. Some of y'all are at the point of sipping on, Michael Penix's bathwater with how hard y'all are simping this man to get on the field. And so it's just get, you guys are out of pocket and just, you need to cool it, right? You guys are out here treating Michael Penix like he's Ash Cash. If you know, you know. So you need to move on. Just basically where we might get there later this season, but we are definitely not there yet. Just stop simping. That's basically what I'm trying to sit here and say. So, I was worried about Kirk's mobility being a problem in this game because I figured, oh, Mike McDonald's going to cook up some blitzes or something that are going to force Kirk to move off his spot. He won't be able to do that. That could be a problem. But it really wasn't the blitzes that were getting to the Falcons. It wasn't anything schematically that the Seahawks, in my opinion, were cooking up, right? It was just our offensive line losing too often up front. And Kaleb McGary stood out in a major way in that regard. There were several times in this game where Derek Hall was able to bull rush him into oblivion. And if you're an everydayer of this podcast, you know that we talk a lot about what each one of these starting 5 offensive linemen are weak at, and power, dealing with the bull rush has never been a major issue for Kaleb McGary, right? His struggles are against speed. Now, power is an issue for pretty much everybody else on the offensive line, but not really Kaleb McGary. And to me, that is an indicator that the knee issue that he's been dealing with the last couple of weeks, that sprained MCL injury that caused him to miss a game and he's been playing on, these last couple of weeks, is still an issue, right? It's still a factor, and it reminds me a little bit of something that happened with Jake Matthews back in 2016 when he hurt his knee, I believe, against the Kansas City Chiefs late in that season in week 13 in 2016. And he played on it. He didn't miss a game or whatever. But you could tell watching the film, or at least I could tell because I was the only person out there, me and Alan Sturck, watching the film back then. But, am I still butthurt about that? No, that's something I'll deal with in therapy. Anyway, but you could tell on film it was still bothering Jake Matthews. But for the most part, like it wasn't a major issue for him down the stretch in those games. There was a couple of games where it was like, oh yeah, Jake is struggling a little bit. But for the most part, he was able to play on it, but it never really healed. And you figured, it was kind of out of sight, out of mind after a certain amount of weeks till we got to the Super Bowl. And then to me, that was the game where it reared its ugly head. Was like, oh yeah, he did play hurt these last, 6-7 weeks or whatever. And he's not fully healthy. And it led to a bad game in which, much as many Falcon fans, and I'm sure some of you guys that are everydayers of this podcast still hold Jake most to blame more than anybody else for the Falcons losing the Super Bowl because of that holding call or whatever. We're not going to get into that on today's episode. I say let it go. That's what you should be in therapy for. But anyway, I think McGary's knee is an issue. He's still able to function on it, but to me, you're clearly not getting the same Kaleb McGary that we've been accustomed to. Now, I'm sure some of you guys are like, the same old Kaleb McGary's the worst, but that's we need better help to sponsor today's episode. No, but I'm saying, like, I don't think McGary's holding back this offense. But it was an issue this past Sunday. And we'll see. Like, again, I know there's a vocal contingent of Falcon fans that are like, Storm Norton is better or just as good as Kaleb McGary. And I'm like, no, he's not. But, we live on Kaleb McGary Island on this podcast. And, I feel like now that Kaleb McGary is dealing with this knee issue, and now if he's going to be not only susceptible to speed rush, but also the bull rush, now you can actually have a legitimate conversation where the gap between him and Storm Norton is much smaller than it was. Like, Storm Norton was susceptible to speed and power, healthy or not, and now Kaleb McGary is now susceptible to both speed and power. And the Falcons have mitigated the speed issues because they love to chip on that side a lot. So, he's got to do his job to hold up against the power in McGary. So we'll see if this continues to be an issue moving forward. And there may be a certain point where we do have to say, like, maybe we should sit McGary, but I don't think that's going to be the case. We're just going to have to gut through it, hope it gets better after the bye. And that's kind of what it's going to be. So hopefully this won't linger like the Jake Matthews situation, 8 years ago, lingered for 6-7 weeks and then it rears its ugly head. But, we got Max Crosby, I don't know what Micah Parsons' status is at this point in time, but we got some good pass rushers that could really cause some problems, basically, at this point in time. So hopefully, because, of that game that doesn't exist, right? Hopefully Zach Robinson has learned from that non-existent game that we flushed away, and that won't be an issue moving forward. So we'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but let's wrap up today's episode talking about the defense. And I'm going to reiterate the point I made yesterday where I feel like the secondary was the Falcons' biggest issue on defense. And we'll break down why as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You can place your first $5 bet on anything, right? Anything you want. Go over to fanduel.com, check it out, whatever you want to bet. And then they're just going to give you $200 guaranteed. Doesn't matter if you win or lose that $5 bet. They're just going to give it to you. And they're going to say, hey, we love you here at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're going to take care of you. Here's $200 to put on whatever you want, right? And so if that first $5 bet or that $200 in bonus bets, you want to put it towards this weekend's Falcons Bucks, game. Hey, the Falcons, this line is flipped because of the injury news related to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, right? Those guys are out for this game. We'll talk about it more on tomorrow's Locked On Falcons, but the line flipped from the Bucks being 2.5 point favorites yesterday to now the Falcons are 2.5 point favorites. This is why you got to take advantage of the offers over at FanDuel immediately, guys. You got to sign up now, right? Because if you bet yesterday thinking the Falcons were going to win by 2 points or whatever, you would have won money. But guess what? If the Falcons now win by 2 points, you're not going to win money. So go check it out, guys. Go to FanDuel.com right now, America's #1 sportsbook. So the Falcons, of course, began Kirktober by beating the Bucks. Will they end Kirktober by beating the Bucks? Find out tomorrow on tomorrow's Crossover Thursday with myself, James Yarko of Locked On Bucks. Will be previewing this Week 8 matchup. But let's revisit something I discussed on yesterday's episode when it came to talking about the Falcons' defensive struggles in the Seahawks game. And as I said then, and I'll reiterate on today's episode, I felt like the defensive secondary was the bigger issue in the Seahawks game than necessarily the pass rush. Now, if you missed yesterday's pod, how dare you? You're not an everydayer at this point in time. But to reiterate what I said on yesterday's episode, for those of you that just haven't gotten around to it because you're busy or something, or whatever you're doing with your life, you're making terrible choices by not listening to this podcast each and every day. But I basically said the Falcons got a ton of pressure against the Seahawks in this game. They got more pressure last week against the Seahawks than they have done from any team this year. And I think according to certain analytics sites, like it was more pressure than I think any team has gotten this season, whatnot. Unfortunately, the Falcons didn't convert that pressure into sacks. But most to me of their breakdowns, especially the explosive plays, the 6 of them that they allowed in the first half of the game, which to me was a big factor in why they fell behind in this game. The big reason why they lost this game, in addition to some of the Kirk Cousins turnovers and whatnot, which was really more why they couldn't climb back into the game, was the Kirk Cousins issues, but they fell into the hole because of the defense giving them explosive plays. To me, most of those issues were due to the Falcons' breakdowns in the secondary. Now, a lot of it was guys being out of position. I think every single one of those 6 explosive plays, somebody on the back end, messed up basically to contribute to why that play, instead of being a simple completion or whatever, or an incompletion, wound up being an explosive play. So, for example, the DK Metcalf touchdown right before the halftime. There has been much debate in the Locked On Falcons Discord over the last 48 hours on what the coverage was on that particular play. Hit the link in the description if you want to join that conversation. But basically, to me, it was very obviously the Falcons were in 2-man under, which is basically man coverage underneath with 2 deep safeties. And on that particular play, Justin Simmons was out of position, kind of needed to guard against the deep post, but bit on DK Metcalf's head nod to the outside, left AJ Terrell out to dry, where he had outside leverage, hoping that he would have inside help from that safety. And he didn't have the inside help because Justin Simmons was out of position on that particular play. And, because it was man coverage, it's going to go in my notes as a 31-yard touchdown allowed by AJ Terrell, but there'll basically be an asterisk beside it because it'll basically be like, Justin Simmons, you screwed up, not AJ Terrell on that particular play. So that does happen at times. So, again, this is not meant to be a referendum on the Falcons secondary, who has generally played very well this year, has been the strength of the defense this year. But in the larger scheme of things, certainly over this 7 games that we've seen this year, the Falcons pass rush has been much bigger of an issue. But I do feel like people trying to make the pass rush as being an issue in this specific game, or being the biggest issue in this specific game, I think is more just people pushing agendas and narratives and whatnot, basically ignoring data in order to fit their narrative. And again, you can certainly knock the pass rush for getting as much pressure without getting sacks. That's fair. And certainly not every individual in the Falcons pass rush was playing at a high level. Matthew Judon looking at you. But to me, Sunday's game, if you're looking at it without sort of that sort of narrative driven focus, is Sunday's game to me is a clear indicator of progress for this pass rush. Now, whether that progress continues, time will tell on that issue. But I do want to highlight some of the progress that this unit showed on the extended all-22 review, where I'll be looking at some of the positive plays from both Arnold Ebiketie and Zach Harrison, two young guys that arguably, in at least AK's case, I think arguably had the best game of his career against Seattle. And you can certainly make the case that Zach Harrison had the best game of his season against Seattle. I think the Colts game last year was probably a better game overall for him. But this one was pretty close. At least you can have a debate on that. And so I do want to look at those guys, and we'll see if those guys can continue that in the future. But if they do, it'll be great things for this pass rush. And as I mentioned on yesterday's episode, if you can get Matthew Judon playing like we think Matthew Judon is capable of playing and has been shown to play in the past, I'm not going to sit here and say like suddenly your pass rush issues are cured, but you're going to be in a much, much better place when it comes to the pass rush moving forward. So we'll see. Again, who knows if that's the case? We might look back at this game and say, oh, that was a one-off, or we may say like that was a turning point for this Falcons pass rush. But, I have to look for silver linings when it comes to the pass rush, partially because I'm very skeptical that the Falcons are going to make any big time splash trade over the next 2 weeks that's going to solve their issues in terms of the pass rush. And so, for the sake of my own sanity, I have to find something positive to look at. And so that's what we're going to focus on in the extended all-22 review, in addition to highlighting Bijan's big day, Kirk Cousins' struggles. We'll also look at a couple of plays from the rookies, the one Michael Penix pass that people are going gaga over, which was really a Casey Washington play. And so we'll highlight that for those reasons. We'll talk more about the secondary struggles and highlight, we'll go deeper into why, those explosive plays were breakdowns. We'll talk about Jace McCullough getting some work in the garbage time. Got to talk about these rookies because, who knows when they're going to play next. So make sure if you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider and get access to that extended all-22 review, hit the link in the description at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. It's a 14-day free trial. So you can try it out for free. Get this extended all-22 review, which typically drops Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon. You get that for 14 days for free, this one and the next one. And then it's $4.99 a month after that if you enjoy those types of things. You also get access to all the video breakdowns that I've done throughout the summer, the off season, last season, all that stuff and more. Not to mention, you get my updates on roster moves, like the Falcons signed Philip Dorsett. I talked to the Locked On Falcons insiders about what was the reasoning behind that move, hours ago before many of you guys are listening to this, as well as, talking about the impact of Mike Evans and why this is a important Troy Anderson game. But the rest of you guys that aren't Locked On Falcons insiders will have to wait till tomorrow's crossover Thursday to get that insight. But you can get that early by becoming a Locked On Falcons insider, in addition to getting access to that extended all-22 review, where you will actually get not only hear me talk about the plays as I've done on this regular all-22 review, but you will actually get the high definition, crisp HD all-22 film of me breaking it down and whatnot. If you're a visual learner as opposed to an audio learner, the extended all-22 reviews are for you. So hit that link in the description, become a Locked On Falcons insider. Guys, that's going to do it for us here. Check out tomorrow's episode. It will be a crossover Thursday with James Yarko of Locked On Bucks. We'll get more into all of this game. We'll get some updates on Troy Anderson's status for this upcoming game, as well as other injury updates for both of these teams on tomorrow's episode. So stay locked, as Locked On Falcons as your first listen on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, 2 shows daily. The Madman Tyler Rowland giving you that shot of NFL espresso first thing in the morning. Tony Wiggins giving you, taking you to the barbershop for some real NFL talk as the second show daily, giving you guys covered for what's going on with the other 30 NFL teams, around this league. So check it out, Locked On NFL as your second listen. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every